All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Pfeiffer. Welcome to Conversations on Retail. It is a beautiful day in Bentonville, Arkansas, and we're excited to kick off a brand new series with our friend Jorge Risquez, the co-founder and CEO of BOPS. And that series is called CPFR 2.0, the technologies that are bringing us closer to consumers. And Jorge's first guest for this session is Mr. Richard Sherman. He's a senior fellow of supply chain at Tata Consulting. Just a couple of things before we kick off this afternoon. First of all, I want to thank BOPS. They came along as group sponsors and then sort of have a great big vision for creating a new group. So we're at the very beginning. We're excited about the partnership with this team, this organization. And I know by way of his introduction, Jorge will tell you a little bit more about BOPS as we go. Also, just wanted to remind everyone, this is intended to be a conversation and not a presentation. So you that are joining with us live, we've got a good number registered. We'll have some folks trickling in as we go, I'm sure, but we would love for you to participate in this conversation. And you could do that simply by clicking on the Q&A button in Zoom and submitting your questions and comments and insight right there. And Jorge and I will be sort of moderating those questions and comments as they come in. Lastly, just a reminder that the opinions or recommendations that are expressed by the experts that are leading and participating in these conversations are their own and not necessarily those of Conversations on Retail. So any of the opinions or recommendations that are offered, make sure you weigh those against the suitability of your own circumstances. So without any further ado, Jorge, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Matt. We really appreciate the introduction, and welcome everyone to the first episode of CPFR 2.0. We're excited to have you here. We're going to be talking about everything related to CPFR, collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment, especially along the lines of supplier retail collaboration. Today, I'm very thrilled to be having one of the most iconic figures of the supply chain space, CPG, Mr. Rich Sherman. He's a legend in the supply chain world. He has worked in companies like Colgate, Syncra. He has published multiple best-selling books in supply chain management and a lot of good articles along CPFR, which we're going to talk about it. And he also served as a member of the big CPFR committee. So without further ado, Rich, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about you, your career, and how and when you first encountered with the concept of CPFR.
Okay, well, that's a lot, George. I don't know that we'll have enough time to cover my entire career. It's been a long one, and but I got into logistics just after it became logistics and had transformed from physical distribution management. So the National Council of Physical Distribution Management became the Council of Logistics Management. And I was with a company called Digital Equipment Corporation at the time, DEC. Came to find out that stood for Doubtful Employment Continuation. As our founder said, there'd never be a reason for anyone to have a personal computer. But at any rate, I worked a lot with CPG companies when I was with DEC. I was the industry manager for logistics, and it was a transforming time. And we were just beginning to apply technology to logistics decision support. We developed at that time the digital logistics architecture, and working with clients, I got to develop quite a lot of supply chain and technology infrastructures, most notably a enterprise architecture for Colgate-Palmolive, where a lot of my ideas and concepts around integration and technology and decision support started to come to fruition. While I was at DEC, I also got to meet Peter Senge, the author of The Fifth Discipline, the art and of the learning organization. And Peter was a disciple of Jay Forrester, who in 1957 launched the first digital supply chain twin. And he did a computer simulation of product movement through a multi-echelon supply chain and pioneered industrial dynamics, systems dynamics, and ultimately what we're beginning to call today is ecosystem thinking. And so that's the major transformation to win right now. So I'm not going to spend a lot more on my career, but the transformation that is occurring today is the transformation from a linear, sequential, siloed, functional linkage, i.e. a chain, into more of a network, an enterprise systems network and supply network, which is based on systems thinking. And so that's kind of the lead-in that I think we can give people, other than the fact that I should have retired 8 or 9 years ago, but it's just too much fun to be in supply chain these days. It's our star turn.
Absolutely. It's
five years ago, I could go to a cocktail party and say I work in supply chain, and they would like, oh, who are you? Now I want to know what it's all about. So it's exciting, George.
I know. It's super exciting. And I think I really love this concept, and we're going to talk a little bit more about ecosystem transformation. But before we do that, Rich, I think given this is the first episode, why don't you define what is collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment for us?
Okay.
What were the early days of CPFR, and why it was so important between kind of the major retailers, right, and suppliers, especially starting with, you could share some of your stories with Warner Lambert.
Sure. I think actually one of the ultimate founders of collaborative forecasting and replenishment, Jay Nuremberg, who was at Warner Lambert at the time, I think he was registered, so I don't know if he's on, but if you are on, Jay, you've been an inspiration to work with over the years. That said, Ted Ryback was the founder and CEO of a company called Benchmarking Partners in Cambridge, Mass. And we had met when he was on his way leaving AMR Research, and I was joining AMR Research to found their supply chain services. And Ted had a concept of collaboration and brought together a number of companies, including Warner Lambert and Walmart, to develop a concept called CFAR, CFAR, Collaborative Forecasting and Replenishment. And Matt Johnson, who was at Benchmarking Partners from a technical perspective, worked with Jay and the counterparts at Walmart to develop an actual system that they could collaborate on the forecast and demand planning and the replenishment of Listerine, I think it was. And so that pilot, that proof of concept, clearly demonstrated, the phenomenal benefits of retail and supplier collaboration. And, it then, Ted tried to commercialize it. That kind of upset a lot of the members. And so CFAR got moved over to the VIX organization, the Voluntary Inter-Industry Commerce Standards Organization, which is now part of GS1, and began developing the standards for what became collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment. And I won't get into a big debate on that, but I think that was the biggest mistake that was made in the whole CPFR environment.
We're gonna talk about that, because I think you got some very interesting concept around it. We don't have to double click right now, but if we have time, we should definitely touch upon. If not, we could always do another episode of why CPFR failed in the end of the day.
We may transform into that, with this closing part, is that proof of concept and the movement to CPFR kind of stalled things, because it was really hard back in those days to get category managers to spend time with even one supplier. If you were the category captain, you were lucky to get the time of day with the category manager. But for the consumer goods folks, manufacturers, becoming a category captain or even becoming top of mind with a category manager was, the holy grail, because that gives me a real competitive advantage. And nothing can stall collaboration in any environment than the lack of trust that comes from an adversarial relationship. And so when people saw that competitive advantage that the category planning role carried, it kind of stalled things down. So, I wrote, I think, the implementation guidelines for the second report on collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment, where we really tried to keep it basic and keep it focused on improved forecasting, which then would lead to improved replenishment. And we tried to steer companies away from getting too involved in that planning environment. Keep that separate from forecasting and replenishment. Category planning is important, category management's important, but that wasn't really the goal of CPFR. CPFR was really the objective was to improve the forecast, which subsequently could improve the replenishment actions. So I'll move on and let you move on to your next question.
No, and eventually I wanna piggyback on that. So when kind of the Listerine use case started, if I could take kind of improving forecasting and replenishment just kind of for the audience, the benefits was if we could help the suppliers, and in this case, I'm going to take on Walmart as a retailer, avoid missed sales, then suppliers will win and Walmart will win. If we could also help at the same time, Walmart avoid markdowns or potential returns, then supplier will win, Walmart will win. So I think it was really kind of, at least from our perspective, the concept was brilliant. The processes were in place. So what happened afterwards? So CPFR was in there. It started to get some traction in some big enterprises, CPGs, but it was, based on what I understand, it was not deployed to kind of mid-market or smaller CPG or consumer brands. So can you give us your perspectives into that one?
Sure. And that's, I wrote an article that was a little controversial at the time on, why CPFR failed to scale, which is, I think, the article that, led you to me and we started chatting. But, the bottom line is planning can be a fairly intensive process at different levels. And in the consumer goods industry, variability is a significant issue when it comes to cost, service levels. And so the more we can understand about consumer offtake, and the more we can understand what consumers are buying and procuring, better we can be. And this is, I worked on the concept with Colgate when Retail Link was first established. What we discovered was all the variability occurred after a baseline of demand. So there was a certain percentage of their demand that was constant, highly predictable, varied basically only based on seasonality. And all of the peaks and valleys above that baseline were generally event interventions. So a competitor would run a twofer. A competitor would run an end aisle delay. And so we saw a certain portion of that demand dip, not below the baseline, because that's where your brand loyal customers are. But in the battle for the non-brand loyal consumer, there was a lot of variability in events. There were promotional events. There was the taboo word diversion that occurred basically due to incentives in bracket one and bracket pricing in general.
Wait, what is diversion? Can you explain for the audience what is diversion?
Sure. Well, diversion is simple. Let's say, routinely, okay, I have a bracket one price, and that's based on the volume that I'm doing. So if I'm a large retailer, I've got bracket one pricing. If I'm a small regional retailer or maybe even a convenience store operator, I don't get bracket one pricing. I may get bracket three or bracket four pricing. So as the bracket one price holder, I need to maintain a certain amount of volume to get that bracket one pricing. And it may or may not be equal to consumer demand. If it's not equal to consumer demand, I may have to slow down my turns. I may not turn product quite as fast because I want to take advantage of my investing power in that forward buy, if you will, of inventory. And the gross margin return on investment justifies carrying the inventory a little longer because of the increased gross margin I have. Well, if I'm sitting there, I've got this excess inventory from my volume purchase. Instead of holding that inventory, how about if I double my gross margin return on investment by turning around and going to a bracket 2 or bracket 3 local retailer and saying, hey, you want to buy some of this stock at the bracket 1 price? I'll split the difference with you between your bracket 2 price and my bracket 1 price. Win-win. We collaborate. And guess what? Retailers know better than manufacturers. You got to know when to collaborate and when to compete. All right. And at the back end, the retailer's like, yeah, if you can make more money and I can make more money, this is goodness. Okay, so let's collaborate. You know, we don't compete on the highway, we compete on the show. And so that's kind of where forward buy comes, then the diverting of that product. And, you know, we could spend a whole separate session on going more into depth of that. But now that is an example of how demand variability can be unintentionally, you know, compromised because it's not fulfilling true consumer demand. It's fulfilling economic demand and economic movement of goods. So there are a lot of unintended consequences, and that's what we learn in system thinking. In system thinking, for every action, there's a reaction, and I may save some money on the transportation costs, but it may cause a supply disruption to another node in the network. So that whole visibility to not only intended outcomes, but unintended outcomes are driving technology advancements today. This is where we're entering into the connected age. This is where we're always connected. We have end-to-end visibility, and now we've got some pretty easy to use artificial intelligence and new algorithms moving, where we're seeing a real transformation from supply chain to supply network thinking.
I 100% agree. So, and I think I just wanted to kind of that was a brilliant analogy. So you started really with the system thinking and the interdependencies of factors like pricing, product assortment, some economic indicators that are important, right? But then that created the demand variability that you were talking about of why CPFR didn't scale. So if we take it a level down to POS data, and
sure.
And then how do that impacts, right, replenishment? There's some very good concepts of flow casting that I think there's the pioneers here in the call today. So can you elaborate a little bit more on the use of POS data and why it was not used at the best advantage back in the days, which we could actually change the way we could use POS data to do better replenishment, for example. So go ahead.
Sure. Well, I had an opportunity to work with Andre Martin, and Andre Martin is the founder of distribution requirements planning, distribution resource planning, has been a real long term, just as Jay was an inspiration in terms of that collaboration between Walmart and Warner Lambert. Andre's whole notion of forecasting at the final point of sale versus trying to play with all kinds of imaginary statistical. And I always say if your statistical forecast is based on historical information, it'll produce hysterical results. And that's because the marketing department does everything in its power to change history. We don't want to sell what we sold last year. We want to sell more, and we want to sell different stuff. And so that variability compounds itself. And so what we've got to really begin to think about is what is the actual consumer thinking about? And of course, the big transformation was, the brands had all of the category data and market share analysis that they got from IRI and Nielsen. And so they really had power in the channel based on that market data that they had. Well, then IRI and Nielsen started collecting census-based data, actual point-of-sale data at every store in the chain. And now the power gravitated to the category managers and the retailer because they held the actual data, and they had the real data, and they had the data that was flowing through their stores. So they were able to kind of capture the category power. And so point-of-sale became pretty critical in determining what the requirements would be for replenishment throughout that entire supply network, all the way back to raw material suppliers, in fact. Today we're seeing a transformation now from retail data, point-of-sale data power, to hyperscaler consumer data, because now the consumer is the point of demand, not the point of sale, but the point of demand. The consumer has that power. And the hyperscalers like Amazon and Google are gathering all the data on that consumer. And so the power is shifting. So we're seeing a major power shift. We're seeing a major thinking shift. We're seeing a major technology itch. That's why I couldn't retire, because we combine that with a wave of technology that's based on quantum computing and more compute power than ever before. It's based on network collected data, and we're seeing the emergence of multi-enterprise e-commerce, ecosystem commerce platforms such as One Network and Infornexus and E2Open. The whole market's going to go crazy because we've got this, generative AI that we're now going to start applying to all of these billion bits of data. And now, literally, just about the time my physiological data is saying, I think I'm going to crave a hamburger, okay, the whole world immediately knows Sherman wants a hamburger.
I love it.
The next thing I know, my phone starts getting bombarded with promotions that will bring me closer to the hamburger than I've ever been before. So it's a real technological revolution, and companies that aren't thinking in that way are going to have a trouble, because traditionally we think about people, process, technology, right? Everyone knows those people, process, technology. What systems thinking tells you is there is a structural dimension as well to people process. So there's a market structure which determines what processes you need to meet that market operating and business model. And that's going to require a new technology to automate that process, which changes the behavior and activities and skills required of the people that operate that process. So if you're not thinking at a structural level, if you're not thinking about how all of this new technology will support collaboration in the future, because collaboration is going to be electronic. It's going to be digital collaboration, not physical collaboration. I can't scale if I have to phone up every retailer that I do business with. I'm not going to be able to scale up if I have to spend manual time with every supplier that I do business. But in this connected commerce age, with everything connected, the only time I need a human to intervene is when my forecast and my retailer customers' forecast aren't synced up. And that out of sync may require an exception handling, and a person may have to do that, or the system may predict that variation and prescriptively send notification to a planner that they've got to make changes because their actual is about to deviate from their plan.
Spot on. I do want to pick on your example, right? If Rich wants a hamburger today, right, we need to be able to synchronize Rich demand with the inventory flow all the way down distribution centers to the manufacturing facilities. And I think with everything that is happening today, right, and just for the purpose of time, Rich, and I'm pretty sure we're going to bring you back in another conversation to go deeper into some of these topics, where could suppliers, consumer brands or suppliers could start today? Because, right, they're just bombarded with all these data points from retailers. They got data from their ERP systems. So where is a good place to start? And I do want to give a perspective here. And one of the reasons why we're starting this podcast is because CPFR or CFAR, the Collaborative Forecasting and Replenishment, right, has already some pre-built concepts and knowledge that I think has to be the baseline for this network ecosystem to be able to do connected inventory, to be able to do connected planning, connected collaboration. So what are your thoughts for this future, especially on the lens of, again, consumer brands and suppliers?
Sure. Well, I absolutely key to ecosystem commerce maturity is the foundation has to be 3 points. First, I have to digitize. And by digitization, I mean converting analog data to digital data. So I have to eliminate as much, if not all, manual data collection that I can. And so I have to digitize all my documentation and all my data. Once I've done that, I can begin to digitalize my enterprise. And that's now I take that data, electronic data, and I begin to define processes and how that data is used, and I can create robotic process automation, okay? And then thirdly, because I now have more simulation power than I've ever had, I have to be able to create a digital twin of my enterprise, of my functions. And so I need to be able to not only collect that data, not only automate my process with my data, but now I need to be able to simulate different conditions that may arise. So, that's where we get into the whole conversation of resilience. Okay. In order for me to respond to disruption, I have to have some type of plan in place, which I can only get to through simulation. So that digital core, if you will, is where people have to focus today. Less than 60% of companies have gone digital. And so that's phase one. That's the base level of maturity. And then in the future, we can talk about the next 4 phases leading to ecosystem resource planning, which is ERP4.
We should definitely we should definitely do an episode on your concepts of ERP4, because I think as you were talking, right, the network, the collaboration, it's a key aspect of it. So if they do this 3 to 4 steps, right, let's just assume they become digital mature, they're able to kind of best collaborate with their own retailers and best collaborate with their own suppliers, right? What are the benefits? If you can name in 3, what are the main benefits that you could get from CPFR 2.0? I think that's the way we could close the meeting today. And then we could open the forum for some questions. If anybody have any questions, feel free to do so.
The biggest benefit, George, is from the ecosystem resource plan. If we take a look at driver shortages, we talk about underutilization of capacity. 30% of all the trailers on the road today are running empty and driving empty miles. And yet we're talking about, we've got all these driver shortages. What if we can optimize the market ecosystem for transportation and be able to optimize based on 100% capacity utilization? Think of the billions of dollars that would save, not only the billions of units of carbon and greenhouse gases. Think of all of that economic and environmental benefit that would come from optimizing a commodity such as transportation in a network. That's where collaboration comes in. Collaboration comes in by democratizing costs that don't provide any competitive advantage, but actually could create shared value for everyone in that ecosystem. So that thinking of how does collaboration contribute to a shared value to the ecosystem and to the planet is not only is it somewhat altruistic, maybe somewhat inspirational, but with a little bit of perspiration, we could get it done.
I love it. And I think it's this is the good way to kind of finish the conversation, given we have 30 minutes. Rich, I do want to thank you for your contributions to the industry. More than the contributions you have done is tremendously. I'm pretty sure we're going to bring you back. I want to open the forum to see if there's any questions. And Matt, I think you're gonna help us facilitate some of those. I think we could give 5 minutes for questions if there's any.
I don't see any questions, but I just sent a note out to everyone. If you do have questions, there's one that just came in. For anyone else, so just simply click on the Q&A button and submit your questions and comments in writing. Just some feedback from Bob. Great presentation. Thank you for that, Bob.
Thank you, Bob. And if you don't have questions now, but you have questions later, feel free to kind of reach out either through LinkedIn or through some of kind of the social network. We're more than happy to answer any questions, especially around your collaborative and forecasting processes today. And if, again, we're going to be here. So I just want to kind of give 1 minute to see if there's any other questions. If not, Matt and Rich, we could close the episode today.
Yeah, I think let's do this while we wait for potential customers. Why don't you guys, Jorge, why don't you talk a little bit more about BOPS? I don't think you really had an opportunity to do that. And then I would love for both of you to share your contact information with this audience. The answer to this question, this is being recorded, and we will have it up on our website and our YouTube channel within the next couple of days. But Jorge, why don't you talk a little bit about BOPS?
Absolutely. I do want to kind of give most of the attention to Rich today, given his perspectives and experience. But yes, Matt, I'm the co-founder and CEO of BOPS. BOPS stands for Business Operators, and it goes back really with, it's a connected inventory platform. We're helping CPG brands avoid stockouts and overstock, and it all comes with connected inventory, connected planning, streamlining the CPFR process. So we've been deep. We really think around the concept of connected collaboration. It's the best way to avoid the bullwhip effect that impacts on stockouts and overstocks that a lot of companies are having today. And yes, I'm very blessed to be kind of, after my 10 years at Deloitte Consulting, doing supply chain and seeing the inventory problems that companies have. There's no better way to solve those problems than doing the right collaboration. And we're starting with the collaborations between retailers and the consumer brand suppliers.
Great feedback from LCO. Thank you. Says Rich actually is a legend. Thanks for being here.
How are you, LCO?
Yeah. So listen, if no other questions, why don't you guys provide your contact information? What's the best way for folks to get in touch with you and your team at BOPS? And then Richard, the same thing. If folks wanted to sort of continue the conversation, what would be the very best way to reach out to each of you?
I'm going to place my email, which is jrisquez@bops.ai, or through LinkedIn. I think if you guys have any questions, I think that's the best way to reach out to me. Rich.
And for me, very simple, rich.sherman@tcs.com. I'm a senior fellow in the Supply Chain Center of Excellence at Tata Consultancy Services, and more than happy to answer any questions, speak, do a workshop, whatever. Happy to help advance this field further.
Thank you very much.
Great stuff, gentlemen. Without anything else, Jorge, thank you so much. This is going to be an incredible series. What a brilliant selection of your first guest. It was great for me to gain some historical perspective, as well, sort of seeing a glimpse of the road ahead. So thank you both so much. Jorge, you for investing the time to kick this series off. Richard, it's great to meet you. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you all again soon. Have a great day.
Thanks, man.
Take care.